welcome everyone. It's wonderful to be here this afternoon for another exciting event from the Mad Studies Hub. Before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping notes, and then I'll do a more formal introduction. I wanted to let folks know in the room and on Zoom that we are recording this event today, just the panel and the speakers. We are not going to be recording the question and answer, and we are not videotaping anybody who is on the screen, just so people are reassured when you see that the recording button is on. And then secondly, for those of you on Zoom, for accessibility, you can always enable the Zoom captions. Oh, okay. Can people hear me okay on Zoom? Good, sorry. So I'll speak a little bit louder. So I know Maria's put in the chat about enabling captions on Zoom for accessibility purposes. And I think those were my two housekeeping things. So I should have started by introducing myself. I'm Marina Morrow, and I'm a professor here at York in the School of Health Policy and Management. I'm also the inaugural director of the new Mad Studies Hub. And we're really excited about this event today: international MAD movements, lived experience, global solidarity, and the future of mental health justice, which is featuring our visiting scholar all the way from Australia, Matthew Jackman, and panelists, Jeffrey Ryu, Holly Harris, Veronica Cho, and Christine Boise. So Christina and Jeffrey are on Zoom, so you'll see them. We will spotlight them when they're speaking, and you'll have a chance to see them. But before I introduce the speakers in the event, I wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. And since we're all, many of you are joining us from off of York campus, I just encourage you to acknowledge the land that you're on. And so the official land acknowledgement for York University's campuses has been developed by our treaty partners, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. So I'm going to use that land acknowledgement today because we're on our Keele campus. So First Nations peoples have lived on this part of Turtle Islands for millennia, stewarding the land, the water, and all that contributes to life in this region. Today, the culture and presence of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples enriches the lands and people of this territory. More than 2 centuries ago, the Mississauga people welcomed settlers to this territory, providing sustenance and engaging in trade and commerce. Between 1781 and 1820, 8 treaties were signed between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who opened their territory to settlement. Today, York University is our Keele campus is located on Toronto Purchase Treaty 13 and is situated on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The treaty history, as you know, is foundational, and it's our collective responsibility to honor the land as we honor and respect those who've gone before us, those who are here, and those who are yet to come. We are grateful for the opportunity to be learning, working, and thriving on this land, and we commit to learn the truth and be active in the process of reconciliation. So as I mentioned, the Mad Studies Hub is really excited to be hosting this event. And if you don't know about the Hub, it brings together scholars and students at York across 5 of our different faculties. And our membership has now grown to include many people outside of York who are scholars, students, activists, community-based mental health organizations, or just people who are interested in the community and learning about our work. But sort of the shared idea behind the Hub is applying critical theoretical frameworks to mental health and to work in collaboration with members of the Hub related to research, education, and knowledge mobilization that centers MAD lives and experiences. So if you're interested in the Hub and you don't know about it, I know that Maria will be posting something in the chat. I also have, I'll pull it out, send it around. It's a QR code that you can click on and learn more about the Hub, and join as a member or join our listers if you haven't already. So now I'm very excited to introduce Matthew Jackman. I'm going to introduce him and all the panelists before Matt comes up to speak. So Matt is a visiting scholar with the Hub from Australia, and he's going to be presenting his work on how lived experience leadership shapes the development of MAD movements internationally. So just by way of introduction, Matthew's a MAD activist, a researcher, a PhD candidate at the University of Sydney. His work explores international MAD movements, lived experience, leadership, and epistemic resistance in mental health. They are the founder and director of the Australian Centre for Lived Experience and the founder of MAD Collective, a social enterprise and community platform advancing MAD pride, lived experience leadership, and social justice. Matthew is also a commissioner on the Lancet Psychiatry Commission on lived experience in mental health research, Western Pacific regional advisor to the Global Mental Health Action Network, and has contributed to a range of WHO initiatives on peer support, community mental health, and meaningful engagement. Their work bridges activism, scholarship, and global advocacy, focusing on how MAD communities create knowledge, build solidarity, and challenge dominant psychiatric paradigms. We're delighted to have Matthew here with us as a visiting scholar, and really looking forward to hearing about your research today. So following Matt's talk, we're going to have 4 panelists who are going to be responding to Matt's presentation and talking about some of their own work as well. And then we will open things to a question and answer, but I encourage those of you on Zoom to use the chat as you like. And so now I'm going to introduce the panelists before I invite Matt to come up. So first up is Jeffrey Rue. So Jeffrey is online, and Jeffrey teaches MAD People's History in the Critical Disability Studies graduate program at York University. He's co-editor, along with Adil Abdullaha, Bren Francois, and Robert Menzies, of the forthcoming 2nd edition, make sure you watch for it, MAD Matters, a critical leader in Canadian MAD studies. In the room, we have Holly Harris. Holly is a PhD candidate here at York in gender, feminist, and women's studies. She draws on MAD studies, critical disability studies, feminist standpoint theory, and social movement training theory, alongside of her own lived experience of psychiatric system encounters and associated activism. And her research theorizes possibilities for coalition building among the diverse constituencies of the consumer survivor ex-patient movement toward more just and liberatory futures within and or beyond psychiatry. So welcome, Holly. Sitting next to Holly is Veronica Cho. So Veronica is a mental health advocate, artist, and health policy professional. She serves as the co-chair of the Global Mental Health Action Network's Expert by Experience Action Group on Deinstitutionalization. And she's a senior lead in health policy strategies and solutions at the Ontario Hospital Association. She's particularly interested in building movements that organize around ending coercive practices in mental health care and advancing community-based, culturally affirming alternatives to care. She holds an MSc in Global Mental Health at King's College London and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine from the UK. And last but not least is Christina Coisy, who's online. Christina is a MAD artist, researcher, and health humanities practitioner. She currently is based in Toronto on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Credit. She holds a PhD in humanities and works at the intersections of MAD studies, disability justice, and research creation. Her recent publication, Sounding MAD Poetics as Resistance Methods and Research Creation, appeared in 2025 in Disability Studies Quarterly. As a former health equity and lived experience advisor at CAMH's Provincial System Support Program, Christina developed critical tools for resisting the co-optation of MAD, consumer survivor ex-patient analysis and activism through strategic epistemic justice projects and community engagement practices. Her work has involved leading organizational change initiatives such as the Meaningful Engagement Critical Thinking Workshop Series. And then finally, her artistic and research projects have been supported by the Ontario Arts Council and Toronto Arts Council, and her sound, art, poetry, and collage work have been exhibited internationally. She's also board member at the Psychiatric Survivor Archives of Toronto with Jeffrey. So that is a lot of expertise and background for you to kind of absorb as we listen to this fascinating talk. So I'm going to invite Matthew to come up.
Something's like the sounds.
Yeah.
That's what I'm.
Okay.
By the way, I'm just here so we can have captions. But you can speak to the right.
Right. Hey everyone in the room and everyone online. It's so wonderful to be here for this really important community event, dialogue panel. It's a real honour and privilege to be amongst friends and allies. So yes, thank you for having me, and Marina, thank you so much for hosting me and having me in this very precious and meaningful space for many of us. I'm Matthew Jackman. You can call me Matt unless I'm in trouble or you're my psychiatrist. I use they, them pronouns, and as Marina mentioned, I'm both activist, researcher, and have come to MAD studies and MAD research from a lot of, a decade of advocacy and activism myself. So I have a very pragmatic orientation to MAD studies. Pass me the water, please. Thanks. Should remember that. Before I want to begin, I just want to again sincerely thank York University, the MAD Studies Hub, Marina and the team for having me here. And I want to thank everyone for being here, being present and participating. We've had over 120 registrations for the event, so it's wonderful to know that there's an appetite for this space and for collective liberation as we move forward. I also want to mention and acknowledge that today's discussion may include references to potentially distressing experiences in relation to mental health systems, psychiatry, institutionalisation, trauma, and coercion. Please be kind and gentle with yourselves and feel free to take a pause, step away, do what you need to do, both in the room, in the space, and online virtually. As I know, things pop up and we never know what might impact us. So today I'm going to just be sharing a few early findings from my PhD work where I've interviewed 44 folks around the world doing various lived experience-led resistance work. And I'll be briefly sharing some of my own lived experience and situating myself in this work and how I've come to it, as well as some philosophies and understandings of madness myself, and then my involvement in mad activism, lived experience movement. So a little bit about who I am and what I've done, where I've come from, and how that's situated in this, my interest in this particular project. So the project Labour of Love centres the knowledge of people who have been, of course, psychiatrised, marginalised, criminalised or excluded, people who have been organising, theorising and leading change across the world. And as I mentioned, I've sort of interviewed people across all different regions, which I'll speak to as I go on, from both global majority and minority. And I just want to briefly explain as well that I'll be using the term MAD quite a lot, and I use that in a reclaimed political and cultural sense in politicising it. I could have used something like fear or lived experience, but I didn't want to depoliticise the nature of our work. And I know MAD is not perfect and comes from Eurocentric origins. And as some of the participants expressed that it's not the best term and it is resisted in some contexts, but we do the best with the language that we have. So that's why I'm using that particular term. Next slide, please. Just to echo Marina as well, I would also like to acknowledge the land and country that I'm on, and just echo the Hill campuses being situated on the traditional territories of the Hura-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, being located on the Toronto Purchase Treaty number 13 lands. And for me as well, for thousands of years, of course, First Nations peoples have cared for, stewarded and sustained these lands, waters and ecosystems. And as a visitor from so-called Australia, I acknowledge the importance of Indigenous sovereignty, self-determination and the responsibilities we all share in confronting ongoing legacies of colonisation, which have a very strong, unfortunate relationship with psychiatry and that. So I just thought I'd very briefly share a bit about who I am. As MAD studies for me is very important in being reflexive and owning the positionality you have, the power, the privilege, the oppression, the advantages and disadvantages. I often say, my madness is a dangerous gift that requires harnessing, and my PhD has been a social tool to harness those gifts, and at times not. So for me, scholarship, research, knowledge generation is inseparable from my lived experience, politics, spirituality, activism, and the community here and online. And I come from Wurundjeri country in so-called Melbourne or Naarm, and my own family history traces back to British convict ancestry and Irish founded migration, shaped by poverty, criminalisation, displacement. Much of what psychiatry later diagnosed to me emerged in the context of violence, child abuse and neglect, family trauma, grief, shame, poverty, abandonment, identity struggles, existential crises, and profound emotional overwhelm. In the context of losing my mother to suicide, growing up as a parentified child and young carer, and carer to my younger siblings as well, who were in and out of the psychiatric system. My last memories are actually of my mother in a psychiatric hospital before she died, and unfortunately suicided a week after being discharged in the late 90s from hospital. I have a number of identities as well, being queer, identifying as non-binary. I came out as non-binary through a manic episode, so madness gave me great wisdom in breaking down the social norms and boundaries. Whoever said madness is not knowledge, you know. So I've experienced a lot of altered and extreme states, again, that have been framed through diagnostic language and policed through the psychiatric or psych complex. And over the past decade, in terms of my work life, my career, I've done a lot of social movement organising and see myself more as a connector. We all have our strengths and our roles, and I love people and I love connecting people. So I see myself as a bit of a connector in these movements. And have been, as Maria mentioned, involved in a lot of global mental health advocacy work, particularly around shaking UN organs such as the World Health Organization around their very strong biomedical approach, over a decade ago to what is now very much grounded in rights, community-based supports, and peer-led alternatives. And now the kind of work around deinstitutionalisation is our next agenda point, where we're looking at things like alternative support options as housing. So I'm very proud to have seen those changes in the last decade. Slide, please. This is not the most accessible slide, and maybe that's intentional. It's a bit like my mind. It's a bit all over the place. But this is just to share a little bit about my life and my career, and the sorts of activism and resistance. What does resistance look like? It can look like many things. So I feel like some of these images, which are very near and dear to me, capture the diversity, creativity, and political energy of mad movements across different spaces and struggles. So mad activism, of course, is not just about direct action, protest, or policy advocacy. It's about culture making, storytelling, art, humour, scholarship, mutual aid, and community survival. And yeah, there you can see a range of different mad activism-related activities, from writing to speaking in UN spaces to mad theatre and pretending to be psychiatrists and know what they're doing, to merchandise, all sorts of weird, wacky, and wonderful things. Next slide, please. So just before I move on to the research itself, I thought it would be also important to situate my own philosophies of madness. And I come to madness from a very humbling perspective, obviously having been impacted by it. So I certainly don't claim to know any one truth on madness, nor life. So my PhD comprises of a genealogy chapter where I've explored the philosophies and meanings of madness. So I've come to understand madness through my own experiences and readings as not a singular phenomenon or truth or pathology, but something very complex, relational, and deeply human. And as I shared a little bit of my story, I've understood madness as responsive to attachment, trauma and violence, to grief, loss and longing, to poverty, precarity and social exclusion, to dealing with a lot of internal shame, fear and hopelessness, but also spirituality, revelation and identity. Also responses to oppression and discrimination, including homophobia. A lot of political rage, rebellion and manic purpose, or often mania, has been a response to injustice, feelings of injustice, a very human activation of the mind, body, soul, and existential crisis, despair, which has resulted in wanting to end my life. So I want to be, explicit about something that often gets flattened into sort of false binaries, and I certainly see my experiences of distress and or distressing madness are the terms that I now use, which are often described as illness within the context of medicine and psychiatry. I very much understand my experiences as a socio-cultural, spiritual, political or structural phenomenon. But I certainly acknowledge the biological and neurological bases that we might not have knowledge for, but are potentially grounded in the body, such as trauma. Next slide, please. I think one thing to note about madness as well to me is that I think madness sits in the mystery, into the unknown. And I think having an intellectual humility framework and coming to it as from a positioning of curiosity and the unknown, for me has been very important. So on to the research itself. So I'll share a little bit about the background and rationale for the work. So there remain quite significant gaps in our collective understanding of contemporary mad movements. Although we have seen in the last 5 to 10 years a lot of emerging scholarship and writing on mad movements in different contexts, which has been really wonderful to see that visibility. So these movements, of course, have long histories of resistance, survival, innovation, but they're often still marginalised within mental health knowledge systems, but also marginalised within other social movements too. They're often not very well known amongst larger movements such as feminism. So at the same time, we've seen a lot of profound developments in the contemporary movements, such as the rise of Mad Pride from Psychiatric Survivor Day in the early 90s and its evolution in the late 90s, early 2000s. The growing global recognition of psychosocial disability, and that term being utilised in the 2006 Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disability, or the CRPD, which a lot of activists and advocates in the global south, or global majority, utilise the psychosocial disability identity to mobilise. We've also seen the emergence of MAD studies being named more formally in the late 2000s, and the growing visibility of lived experience-led knowledge, and obviously, of course, the MAD Studies Hub is an important part of that genealogy as well, in a MAD Studies evolution. So yeah, why does understanding the MAD movements matter now? We're at a very critical juncture, as many of us know. There's a shifting discourse around global mental health policy and what that means in national contexts. As I mentioned, even WHO has moved in a very rights-based direction and a social and structural determinant perspective. However, these shifts have remained uneven, often failing to fully decolonise global mental health or meaningfully centre global majority or global south resistance, where again a lot of psychosocial disability activism is occurring. There's also a broader political moment as well. We're living in an era marked by a resurgent right-wing fascism, authoritarianism, war, conflict, and authoritarian governance. So in this context, mad people once again, or maybe more visibly, are being subject again to renewed calls for institutionalisation or re-institutionalisation, to forced treatment, inverted commas, and social exclusion. So madness is being again visibly weaponised in political rhetoric, while misinformation around mental health and neurodiversity is circulating widely. See that in the US in particular.
Madam, we're sorry to interrupt, but some people are having trouble hearing, so we're just going to take a minute to change the.
No worries.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Apologies. They're getting an echo.
In there.
They're getting an echo. Right?
Sorry about that, everyone.
Apologies. Yeah, we'll just take a minute.
So you speak some words, Matt, and they can let me know through the chat if it's still echoing.
Hello, it's Matt. I'm here. Can you hear me clearly?
Folks online, please let us know if you can hear better. Oh, it's still pretty bad. Oh dear. Oh, hopefully they can hear. Yeah, there is a weird, we do apologize for the weird rustling noise. That is something in the room, which we're not sure what that is. Something to do with, it must be amplified though by the speakers. Yeah, it's some kind of construction or something going on outside, so we will we probably won't be able to modify that. Yeah, so Maria, do you know about the Zooms or the suppression?
I'm going to suppress this now.
Oh, okay, people are saying it's a little bit clearer, so.
Apologies, everyone.
No, thanks for your help.
Thanks, thank you.
Okay, we're so awful.
I think you can go ahead now.
You can continue, Mike.
Yeah.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah, just let us know how we go. Go with the flow. Yeah, so understanding mad movements in this contemporary context is about recognizing lived experience as knowledge, as expertise, resisting silencing and control, and supporting the collective struggles for dignity, autonomy, rights, and futures where mad people can thrive rather than be managed, detained, and raised. So this study really asks what contemporary international or transnational mad movements can teach us about resistance, knowledge, survival in an increasingly hostile global landscape. Next slide, please, Maria. So a little bit about the research question, which is how to lived experience activists, resistance leaders, whatever languaging really people use to train their expressions of resistance. How do they understand their experiences and the current state and future trajectory of international mad movements? So there's sort of three core components of people's stories, of the current state, and of their future trajectory and thoughts on where mad movements are heading or should be heading. So the question is not only what international mad movements are, but who gets to define them, whose voices are centred, and what these mad leaders are imagining across different regions. Next slide, please. And on another note as well, a lot of the documentation of mad movements or particularly psychiatric survivor movements have been largely North American as well. So it's been really important in this work to visibilise movements that are occurring. As I mentioned before, we are seeing some movement around the visibilising of movements in different contexts, but certainly from a transnational, international perspective, this has been really an endeavour to centre local majority perspectives. So in terms of some of the conceptual frameworks, I won't speak too much about this. This is more the theoretical basis of the work, but I essentially engage with mad studies in centering knowledge that's created and resisted by mad folks from the various identities that I'll talk through, whilst using concepts of mad theory, the psychiatric oppression, sanism, epistemic or knowledge and justice, and use mad methodologies as part of the project. Next slide, please. I've also been playing with sort of new social movement theories as well. So sort of the combination of, mad people's politics along with new social movement theory, given that this is focused on social movements in mad studies. In terms of some of the mad methodologies, as I mentioned, it sits at the intersection of a few different disciplines and theories, and it's very much grounded in the critical qualitative inquiry. I have a chapter on sort of my own autoethnographic grounding and reflexivity, which I spoke to before. I mentioned that I have a genealogy of mad philosophies and how I come to my own philosophies of madness, which, as I mentioned, is very polyphonic, or having multiple truths, constellations of truths. And then the main method was the interviews, peer interviews with people, which situate stories as mad movement texts. And as I mentioned, there's 44 folks that I've interviewed, 39 of them being oral virtual interviews, or a couple of them were in person, and 5 of them were written for accessibility reasons. And in understanding and analysing the texts, I've been further developing reflexive thematic analysis with a mad reading approach to reading through people's stories in conjunction with a mad studies understanding. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief map to indicate some of the locations and positionalities and regions that folks were interviewed within their contexts. So as you can see, there's sort of most regions were covered, some less so than others, and of course their findings in of themselves as to where is visible MAD resistance situated. So I think they're important conversations to keep having from this work. And obviously this really places MAD movements within their socio-legal, cultural and political environment, allowing us to move away from deficit or fragmentation narratives and recognising that there's a plurality of creativity and political intelligence of MAD resistance that occurs in different languaging and different identities around the world. Next slide, please. So I'm still playing around with this, but obviously looking at contemporary MAD movements, I've been looking at extending upon some of the key identities and sort of sub-movements that we've seen within the broader MAD movements, which I've already been talking about. So yeah, traditionally, of course, there's no one-size-fits-all definition here, and this is still up for debate and discourse, of course. But these terms reflect different relationships to psychiatry, disability rights, the state, and activism more broadly. As a lot of folks also don't organise around psychiatry, particularly in the global majority and South. So terms such as consumer, user, survivor, ex-patient, inmate don't necessarily apply. So I've been very interested in documenting that emergence and sort of the last sort of 20, 25 years of work. So of course, the term consumer up the top often implies voluntary engagement with services. So we see consumer or service user or user used in a lot of high income or global minority contexts. And obviously the term survivor or psychiatric survivor, often centering survival from psychiatric harm, which is usually in a closer alignment, I guess, with abolitionist politics, but not everyone. And often there's a rejection or a strong critique of psychiatric authority. Then, of course, some of the earlier terms around ex-patient and inmate in reference to periods of institutionalisation where people were coming out of large-scale institutions. So ex-patient situating identity historically in relation to psychiatry without signalling current service use. And ex-inmate foregrounding that people were incarcerated and saw their experiences as being incarcerated inmates in that context. So identifying in resistance to that. So contemporarily, of course, MAD being a reclaimed identity, transforming that term of insult or pejorative use into pride, resistance, and collective refusal. Part of that, of course, has been MAD pride, which I've spoken about briefly, but also MAD studies and the coining of in 2008 of this particular discipline, emerging from critical disability studies. And then psychosocial disability in the mid-2000s was certainly a key point in time where people began to, post the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disability, started to organise around disability and human rights in global majority and South contexts. And then, of course, psychiatric abolition, again, which I'm still playing around with because it has featured in and amongst the histories, really, of collective resistance. But I think it's important to name again, as it's not homogenous to any one of these identities, and has really re-emerged, particularly in the interviews around cross-solidarity with prison abolition, racial justice, disability justice, and Black Lives Matter movements, particularly following the murder of George Floyd and the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course intensified critiques of institutional violence, confinement, coercion, and structural inequality. And the plus I'm still playing around with is that there are a lot of peer and lived experience movements, some that are very driven and dominated by mental health professionals, maybe well-meaning, maybe people that consider themselves allies, and or family carer movements as well. So I think it's important to mention that MAD movements have had important critical allies, but I think that allyship is something to contest and look at as well a bit more deeply. But I just wanted to ensure that that was included because allies have featured as a key part, but not necessarily a central part of MAD movements specifically. Obviously, we've seen other professionally led movements such as anti-critical psychiatry movements historically. Next slide, please. So here are just some of the important distinctions in how diverse people use language. So, of course, psychosocial disability and madness are up for debate and are contested as well around is madness a disability? For some people there aren't impairing aspects to what's considered madness. But some folks in Latin America, and this particular participant, Aaron, which is a pseudonym in Argentina, talks about using psychosocial diversity politically, and also to include people with psychosocial disabilities, mental disabilities, and intellectual disabilities. So the term psychosocial has been used from the psychosocial disability movement organising, but has also been resisting the disability label. So I think that's important to note that there's these really nuanced distinctions in languaging. Next slide, please. Yeah, amazing, thank you. The next sort of preliminary findings, of course, are people's stories of resistance, survival, identity, and politicization. So I was very curious as to how did NAD folks go from person to political. So this sort of constellation of findings looked at resistance, where participants spoke about resisting psychiatry, or if psychiatry wasn't there and in existence, resisting sanism in family and community and society and wider systems. So there was a lot of refusal, of course, of coercion, of challenging diagnoses, of surviving institutionalization, but also, surviving, sanest workplaces and education institutions. Of course, survival is also a part of that. And of course, survival became itself usually a political critique for people to enter movement work. As I mentioned previously, identities was an important part of that, and is a very complex and ongoing contested space. And politicisation, where a lot of folks described, this is what happened to me, to this is what is happening to us. So that's sort of personal to political, but also personal to collective. Where there was a shift marked in sort of collective political awakening. Next slide, please. So excuse the long quote, but I thought it would be important to speak out for you. So this just speaks to some of that resistance and survival and politicisation from someone who's a very important elder, particularly in global majority South context and psychosocial disability activism. So Waleed talked about, I face humiliation, violence and abuse very commonly in my community and also in education institutes. I've been beaten up regularly by my teachers and tutors, bullied by school fellows in the education institute, known as someone who is useless, a slow learner, a non-active human having mental issues. I should note as well, dehumanisation is an important thread that has come up in most people's stories, which again is due to the complex violence. Beyond that, I've experienced systemic denial of my voice and agency that many persons with psychosocial disabilities face across the world. Building on those childhood issues, I was seen as someone who is a lesser being. Very commonly, I used to be tagged with several identities, such as a person who is mad, sharing stupid ideas or opinions, not capable of achieving anything in life. Nalik, an Urdu word. My caretakers and other community members only had the options of psychiatric care, which might fix me. From an early stage, I experienced how distress was medicalised, depoliticised, and managed through control, rather than understood within social, cultural, and rights-based contexts. I cannot even remember how many times I was taken to visit a psychiatrist or change my medications, because it was not working, and multiple options were tested upon me. The situation was so bad that I had to commit suicide in 2011. And after combating and battling with a number of struggles in life due to a lack of support, in 2015 I completed my bachelor's in economics and started to work with the Cost Disability Organisation as an internee. Someone who's now very prominent in this space. Next slide, please. And just finally, in terms of some of the preliminary findings, that of course bad movements are not a single movement. I use the movements plurally, very intentionally. It's many movements that's often shaped by region, by culture, by politics and histories of psychiatry and colonisation. So there's a real diversity and context-rich landscape of what this activism looks like. Of course, global South or majority perspectives, emphasise different issues. Latin America was a lot of the focus in that context talked a lot about histories of dictatorship and colonisation and how that influenced a lot of their more direct action mad activism, protesting, lighting fires, hitting the streets, which is very different to, say, Asian context, which is much more about dialogue and community, and sort of, I guess, quieter advocacy, and a lot of storytelling and sort of book-based activism as well. Of course, global minority or North perspectives are often centred around the system itself. So, the evolution of consumer movements or peer movements, lived experience movements, the movements of peer support and lived experience workforces, and often still centering around mad pride traditions or psychiatric survivor movements which centred around the system and either reforming psychiatry from within or abolishing it from without, and all in between. There were, of course, a lot of shared global struggles, though, and across regions, epistemic or knowledge injustice of mad people was common, where people, mad people's knowledge was dismissed as irrational, where co-option and tokenism was common across all contexts, and where there was systemic violence against and toward mad people, where we saw, forced treatment, poverty, criminalisation, burnout and precarity was very prominent in all communities, but of course was often more represented in under-resourced communities. So Satanism really had a strong global pattern, along with epistemic injustice. And of course, future visions. A lot of the participants talked, of course, about what their futures are. And there was a lot of discussion around a stronger transnational solidarity and emphasising the importance of global majority and South leadership. Of course, sustainable organising, as there was often a lot of activism burnout due to a lot of these spaces and organisations have very little material resource, and these incredible organisations doing wonderful regional and international work were often funded with maybe 1, 2 or 3 staff and many volunteers. So you can imagine the pressures of maintaining that. And a lot of people doing activism outside of their day job, of course. So these visions point towards a plural, interconnected mad movements that were committed to liberation, despite a lot of differences. Next slide, please. Oh, I think you skipped one. Amazing. So Peter from India mentioned that it's not to say that mad movements or this abolitionist practice is devoid of psychiatry as a system, but it's devoid of the oppression that psychiatry is the only technical expert of what madness looks like. So the idea is to say that when we're building alternate models of care, when we're centering voices of those who would be deemed suicidal or psychotic or insane, we're not saying that psychiatry doesn't have a place in this care model. We're saying that psychiatry is not the only thing which is going to represent, or that sanism that psychiatry brings is not the only explanation for things which are taking place. So just to say that exists, it's more like, I like to give the analogy of a satellite. Satellites exist. It's just that a satellite is another source. So psychiatry existing as a satellite and not as the planet itself, which I thought was a useful visual and metaphor. Next slide, please. So yeah, very briefly through the interviews, but also through, of course, the literature. There are some very key organisations on the next 2 slides that have historically done a lot of wonderful international and regional-based mad movement work with using different identities, of course. So it's just important to spotlight a few of them. And I think what a lot of people don't know is that say for instance, the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry, people with psychosocial disability were some of the leading advocates to get up some of the key articles on the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disability, such as, presumption of legal capacity, right to community inclusion. So we should be very proud in the broader disability movements of our communities and pushing the agenda for not just our communities, but all people living with disability. Next slide, please. So again, here are just a few more organisations that are particularly quite active at the moment. Mad Thinking being more of a cross-solidarity organisation, looking at mad movements in cross-solidarity with other rights and justice movements. Transforming Communities for Inclusion is a really super active space looking at deinstitutionalisation work. Mad movements, of course, persist despite a lot of fragmentation and resource constraints. A lot of the organising reflects local laws, customs and political priorities. And of course, as you can imagine, resistance has taken multiple different forms, whether that be advocacy, peer-led alternatives, cultural production, such as the arts, digital organising. But it's also important to note that if there wasn't visibility, visibility or lack thereof doesn't necessarily equal strength or weakness. So many of these movements had to operate quietly or invisibly, as there were very real safety concerns. And an activist in Lebanon talked about, their priorities for the MAD movement are not getting bombed and having a roof over their head and food on the table. That's their priority. A person in a refugee, one of the participants in a refugee camp talked about having access to psychiatric medicines because USAID had withdrawn all their funding and people didn't have access to their psychiatric medication. So, again, depending on your location and context, not necessarily things you think were priorities. But again, context is everything. And speaking of context, the last bit will just be speaking a little bit to the Canadian context and with some provocations for our panel and for the audience. Next slide, please. So I spoke to 2 Canadian participants. Pamela, the first, spoke about some of the context. So, in her context in British Columbia in BC, she talked about having one of the most barbaric mental health acts that I know of. And in those 3 weeks that you can be detained, the BC government and the psychiatric whatever has the right to give them whatever treatment they want, including ECT. By the time you get to 3 weeks, by the time you get to 3 weeks, if you can get on 5 antipsychotics every day for 3 weeks, you're going to be drooling at your hearing. You're not going to be able to competently stand up for yourself, and you will be committed into a psych ward for however long they want and however long they decide. So the issue of power, came up. When you're up against that kind of power and that kind of those kind of rights to decide for other people and have no voice, it's a very daunting thing. Next slide, please. Another participant in Canada, in Ontario, Angie talked about the movement's being in transition at the moment, at least within this particular local context. So Angie mentioned, I think that we went through a period over the last decade or so of activist burnout. We're smaller numbers in terms of the core group of folks who are really doing a lot of the organising work. I saw a number of them age out or burn out, and a lot of them, of course, passed away as well. So there's an issue of mad folks just getting older, but there's also a significant problem, at least here, and I think more broadly, people with psych histories don't live as long. So people are getting older, but we're also losing a lot of the older generation to death. And as we know, people that are often in contact with the system on psych meds die 20 years younger. Next slide, please. Angie also spoke about a period of regrouping, emergence and revitalisation, so there was also hope and light at the end of the tunnel. And a number of leaders, she spoke about a number of the leaders in the movement have died, which I just mentioned, so it's a big problem. So this sort of knowledge translation and transference was an issue. And others, the folks who are a bit younger, and by younger I mean middle-aged, but they're burning out or they're burnt out for just trying to hold on to too much, doing too much, carrying too much, and the weight of it's really hard work. So I think that we're in a phase of regrouping, of people getting their energy back. It's nice to see now because I see folks starting new things and getting their energies up again or bringing in younger, newer folks. So again, there's this sort of, this intergenerational MAD movement knowledge translation work that's going on. And how do we, as a community, come together, find spaces, whether virtually or in person, but how does that knowledge get passed down from generation to generation so that we don't lose sight of the work that's been done historically. And I see that as a lot of my role as well as someone that feels a bit in between generations is a lot of younger advocates coming through into peer roles and not understanding or knowing our collective histories of resistance and often getting co-opted into whatever the mental health organisation thinks that they should say. I have a mental illness, I take my medication, the service is great, we just need better access, those sorts of narratives that need to be contested. Next slide, please. And Angie also just talked about the mourning, the grief and activism pressures as well. So it doesn't always get talked about, and I don't know that people know how to talk about it without centering certain people or certain names, so that issue of power coming up again, which shouldn't really be the focus, but there's a need to mourn and to grieve and to recognise this pattern of a lot of our leaders die young and die early. It's just sad regardless, but there's also something about the MAD movement. I think where people feel the weight of the world and there's so many interconnecting issues that mad folks face that it's a lot. It's a lot to take on a leadership role in this because you have to carry that, and that has physical ramifications, which I think is, yes, very resonant for me standing up here right now. Next slide, please. So yeah, just in closing, there was a lot of positivity and a lot of hope. And of course, in looking at the future, there are obviously still significant gaps in our collective understandings of these mad movements, and a lot of work still for me to do, but also beyond. So it's important to acknowledge that and acknowledge that we've had these profound developments of mad pride, of psychosocial disability organising, of mad studies, a re-emergence of psychiatric abolition, or at least a more visible conversation around that, and discourse and dialogue around that, whilst also combating, or not maybe combating is the wrong word, but trying to redress and resist, rising authoritarianism and conflict in the world, and issues such as the climate crisis, which are key cross-solidarity spaces that a lot of people suggested mad movements need to better engage. So Mad Movements was really about recognising lived experience as legitimate knowledge and expertise, protecting spaces for collective resistance, care and meaning making, and supporting futures where mad people aren't just managed, contained or spoken for, but defining their own lives or our own lives. So importantly, there was, I don't think there's any one singular, future of mad movements. Perhaps there shouldn't be. These movements are, at the end of the day, plural and contested, relational and evolving. So I'm very interested in sort of the cross-movement solidarity piece, which I know a few folks are doing that in this room. And a lot of people obviously talk about the need for physical community as well as virtual community, feeling a sense of belonging, identity, purpose, but also solidarity, feeling like they had backing by other people to do this work, as it is tiring, it's exhausting. And of course, a lot of people talked about, being insider, outsider. How do I work within systems as an inside advocate, and how do I work outside systems as an outside activist? Which I like that distinction that I often use in my own work. Because as someone very astute said, I interviewed someone who was part of the Mental Patients Liberation Front in the mid-70s, and he very astutely said a lot of these identity politics, many people are many things. Many people are survivors, many people are users and consumers. And I think that's very similar to our resistance work. We have to operate within, we have to have a living, but we also have to operate without, for more radical futures that are beyond the state and institutions. And just the last slide, please. Oh, sorry, you'd already moved to the last one. My bad. Amazing, thank you. So yeah, just in closing, because I think it's important to close on a moment of hope. So again, Angie talked about the current phase, at least in Ontario, is one of knowledge. It's actually a battle of knowledge production and being able to put forth ideas in a way that you can make an argument and that people can appreciate and understand where you're coming from. I think that actually is an important one, and certainly the mad movement's doing work around cross-movement building, cross-movement solidarity, and I think that is really important work that needs to happen even more. But I think there is also knowledge work. I think that is probably where it's been going. So seeing so many young people get into mad studies, and just the development of mad studies, I think that tells me a lot of our energies have gone into that area. Also, perhaps that more people have found being in an academic space safe enough to be able to do what they need to do or do some activism. And I guess at the end of the day, being financially and materially resourced to do that too, which I'd see my PhD as part of. But I think that knowledge development is perhaps also a really significant thing. So again, that holding of knowledge intergenerationally, but continuing to generate knowledge ourselves as mad people to resist the predominant psychiatric forms and paradigms of knowledge that are often very violating. Yes, so that's it from me. Thank you so much for your generosity and engagement, and I'm really looking forward to the dialogue and discussion with our panellists and our community online and in person. So thank you.